Bendy and Boris in the Inky Mystery by this animated phantom and Marco. Chapter 5. A Q&A that leads to more Q's than A's. It was about noon when Detective Featherworth and Detective Ringtail entered the Dancing Lady. They had spent the day chasing one lead after another. They had tried the brothers first, but neither of them had been home. After that, they had decided to go after the most promising witnesses and wait for evening to see the brothers. They weren't getting very far, to John's frustration. Rachel had finally called for a lunch break, since the Crow would work through it and dinner if she could. Rachel knew better than to let the Crow make all the calls. The pair got a table on the second balcony overlooking the dance floor. "Can you read me the statements we've collected so far?" Featherworth asked. "Again?" Ringtail complained. John gave her a sharp look that only birds were able to pull off. Ringtail sighed, knowing there was no helping it. "Fine." Ringtail flipped open her book. "Mrs. Deer said that she saw the victim flee from the woods into town 15 minutes before the accident. She said he seemed panicked and exhausted. She didn't remember if there were pursuers since her baby started crying and she had to attend him. Mr. Hufferson said he saw the victim run past his shop toward the center of town. He remembered seeing two other individuals run the same direction a while after. They were fast. The only details he gave was that they had oddly shaped heads and one of them wore a long scarf. I think he couldn't see beyond his giant quarter-inch lens glasses, but what do I know?" Ringtail snarked. "Your opinion has already been noted, Ringtail. Keep going," Featherworth stated. The raccoon rolled her eyes, but complied. "After that, we have conflicting accounts of whether he was pushed by one of the pursuers, thrown by 2 or 3, or ran over with no one near him. These mixed accounts were from a Mr. Furwise, Mrs. Peckerton, Miss Emplerson, and Mr. Cow. The descriptions vary. They were in black, they were big, they were tall and skinny, they were lions, they were wolves, they had long tails. One had horns like a devil, one was a fish." Ringtail let out a disgruntled sound, finishing the list. John sighed. "This isn't getting us anywhere. We don't have any clear description of the pursuer or pursuers. No physical evidence. It seems we're stuck." "Well, you said that the little guy, Ben, was it? He was hiding something. The driver, Devon, reported that Mr. Wilson said some strange things, like they watch, run, and something about an ink machine. It didn't make any sense to Devon, but it seemed that the Ben kid got it," Ringtail said lightly. The waitress came up and took their orders. "Right, that's our best hope right now. If he knows anything about what Wilson was talking about, then we may be able to piece things together about why he was running in the first place. And his name is Bendy, Rach." Featherworth sighed. "Hey, don't call me Rach. No nicknames on the job. That's your rule, not mine, Joey." John pulled a goofy face that made Rachel snicker, before Rachel became serious again and continued. "It can't be this simple. Anyone that seems to know anything about Wilson ends up dead shortly after, before we could get anything from them or even offer protection." Ringtail grit her teeth. "You sure we shouldn't be losing our minds over this kid?" Featherworth nodded. "I know, that's why I want to keep a close eye on those two." She groaned. "It's pathetic they slipped past us today." Rachel shrugged and reasoned. "Most people aren't gone by dawn." "If anything happens to them, it'll be on our heads," Featherworth said. "True, but there is also the possibility that Mr. Bendy is on the pursuer's side. He was perfectly set there to collect any last information from the victim. Maybe he was supposed to head Wilson off, and it really was all just an accident. That's making an assumption. Thinking he's innocent is making an assumption, Rachel shot back. Innocent till proven guilty, Featherworth smirked. Rachel chuckled at her defeat. I'm sorry. The waitress suddenly appeared. Ringtail flinched in surprise. It was hard to sneak up on her. How had the waitress done that? I couldn't help but overhearing. Are you talking about Bendy and Boris? The woman was in an old-fashioned flapper's dress and cap. Her dark curls were cut close, and her eyes were hard as they switched between the detectives. Ringtail tilted her head in interest. Yes, Featherworth answered in a carefully neutral tone. Do you know them? Ringtail watched the waitress's jaw muscles move as she clenched her teeth. I'm guessing you're cops. I've never seen you around here before. If you think Bendy had anything to do with what happened the other day, you're crackers. Featherworth raised a feathered brow. I assume that means you're close? I've known those boys for years. They're good kids. They've just been dealt a hard hand in life, the waitress said. And you are? Rachel cut in. The woman shot her a sharp look, which made Ringtail smirk at the challenge. Sasha Swingskirt, I'm the owner here, she said tersely. Ringtail blinked in surprise. She was acting as a waitress? Why? Was she short-staffed? It was a small town. Did you witness the accident yesterday? Featherworth asked. Yes, I did. The fire came back to her eyes. And if you think Bendy did anything, you're wrong. He was with me before it happened. Doing what? Ringtail asked. I had just hired him to be security here, she said. Security? Featherworth described the kid as a little guy. How did that work? Rachel was only getting more confused by this businesswoman. Did you see anything yesterday? John asked. Like what? She snapped. Her guard was up, unfortunately, John observed. We received a report that Bendy fled the scene shortly after paramedics arrived. Any idea why? Featherworth said. Sasha hesitated and looked at the crow in surprise. She sat down in an empty seat with a sigh. You can't blame him. He just saw someone die in front of him. Can you tell us what happened? Featherworth asked. She glanced between the two. We heard it, the tires, from in here. Everyone rushed out and I was swept up with the crowd. I couldn't get through. I wasn't sure what was really going on. Then word through the crowd was that someone was hurt, so I sent one of my employees back to call an ambulance and the police. It was only after the paramedics got here that I got people to move. That's when I spotted Bendy kneeling next to the owl. I got pushed back and lost sight of him again. When I finally found him, one of the paramedics was talking to him. Sasha's fire seemed to go out in a blink. He just stared forward with this look of horror, terror staining his face. The poor guy. I tried to get him to respond. I figured he went into shock. It wasn't until I mentioned Boris that he really spooked. He was gone before I could really react, Sasha said. Interesting. Both cops' thoughts. Boris is his younger brother? Rachel asked. Sasha nodded. They used to work together at a mechanic's shop on the edge of town, Sasha said. John glanced at Rachel thoughtfully. Used to? Is it your job offer that changed that? Sasha blinked. No, she sighed. Bendy apparently lost his job last week. I couldn't just stand around and watch him struggle like that. Those boys have been through too much, Sasha said. Mind explaining that a bit more? Ringtail asked, leaning back. They were homeless for quite some time, I guess. First time I remember meeting those rascals, they came in wanting to buy a meal with their first ever steady paychecks. She shrugged helplessly. I didn't know until a couple years later that they stayed in a back alley before getting a tiny apartment. They're resourceful and hard workers. Do you know why he lost his job then? Featherworst leaned forward and rested her beak on her hand delicately. Sasha furrowed her brow. See, that's the odd part, she said. Bendy told me Pete fired him over a car accident caused by faulty maintenance, but he didn't know any details. He was coming here daily to see if he could figure anything out. A car accident? Rachel's eyes widened. She snapped her jaws shut with a click. She didn't want to give away anything she didn't need to. Still, the devil had been involved in something like that before yesterday? Why would he come here for something like that? Why not the police? Featherworst turned her head thoughtfully. He wasn't wrong to come here. This is the most popular hangout in town, and gossip, like an accident, would spread like wildfire. I've heard about yesterday's 100 times just this morning. That's what's so weird. I haven't heard a thing about what Bendy was talking about, and that was a week ago. The detectives shared another look. As for the cops, I'm not really sure why it is, but both of them don't seem to care for the police. It could be mutual too. I haven't seen any of the police go out of their way for those boys, Sasha said. Any guess as to why? Ringtail asked, twitching her tail in interest. Sasha shrugged helplessly. Not really, but if I had to guess... She glanced behind her to make sure no one was nearby to overhear. I would say it's the small-town thinking people have here. Rachel blinked. Oh? Sasha nodded. Yeah, it's like a turtle winning a race is mind-blowing to them. Foxes and wolves are thieves and scoundrels. Cows are supposedly dim, that sort of thing. Is it bad? Ringtail asked cautiously. She might have to watch her tail if it was. Raccoons didn't have that great of a rep either. Sasha shook her head. The most that usually happens is just gossip, or no one helping when they could. I remember how shocked people were when I opened up here and was the owner. I guess I don't fit the part of a club owner for this place. No one stopped me or spoke to me nasty. They just... She shrugged. Stood off to the side and watched. Maybe some backslander, but I couldn't give two shakes about that. Featherworst hummed in thought. Have you seen him today? Yes, he came in this morning to apologize for running off yesterday and made sure he could still work this evening. Sasha smiled. Is he here now? Ringtail started looking around the first floor. Sasha's smile disappeared in a minute. Why? She narrowed her eyes and stood. Rachel looked back to her. John attempted to pluck at her. We still have some questions for him. I left them last night because they seemed exhausted, but we have to continue with our investigation, and Bendy is our best lead right now. She had decided to leave the officer's note for out of it. He hadn't been helping, and she wasn't out to slander anyone. Sasha lifted her chin. Where are you two from anyway? Show me some badges. Rachel looked to John, surprised. Did we really forget to introduce ourselves? John sighed. Rachel giggled. I guess we're more out of it than we had thought. John turned to Sasha. I am terribly sorry. I am Detective John Featherworth, and this is Detective Rachel Ringtail. We're homicide investigators from Toontown. We follow the lead here. She reached into her pocket and pulled her badge out. Sasha gasped. Homicide? What does any of this have to do with murder? Ringtail shrugged and looked apologetic. We can't really say. The details are confidential. Sasha went pale. This is all a bit more serious than I thought, isn't it? Neither detective answered her. She dropped her head into her hands. Bendy, what did you get into this time? Is he here, ma'am? Featherworth asked again. No, he went to lunch with his brother. I expect him to come back any time, though, Sasha said. Featherworth nodded. Thank you, she said kindly. Sasha nodded and turned to go. Ringtail was just about to speak when Sasha turned on her heels. He's not in trouble, is he? She asked, worried. I hope not, John answered honestly. You'll help him, right? Sasha wrung her hands. You aren't gonna leave him out to dry. Miss, we work to get justice. If he is innocent in this, we won't let anything happen to him, Ringtail said. Sasha thought about that a second, before nodding, and left without another word. As soon as she was gone, Ringtail looked at her partner. And if he's guilty, we're going to take him down. I mean, fired for tampering with a car, then a week later Ollie dies in a car accident? Is there really someone in the world that unlucky? I'm thinking practice makes more sense. John narrowed her sharp eyes. But don't forget, no one heard about this supposed car accident from a week ago. Ringtail groaned. Guess we'll have to go by the office and ask if there's a report. Featherworth held back a sneer. Stars, not the station again. They made her so tired. This guy seems to be a handful.
Sasha, is this schmuck here telling me the truth?
A loud, deep voice echoed up to the two. The pair of detectives looked down to the first floor. Standing before the owner was a tall elk in a nice, if not somewhat worn suit. His horns gleamed in the lights of the bar. A short, dark figure stood to his side, hands in his pockets and shoulders relaxed. But his light eyes looked weary. Well, speak of the devil, Rachel smirked. John snorted. That was in bad taste, Ringtail. Really? I thought it was clever, she retorted. Should we do something about that? Let's see first, the crow answered. But be ready. Her partner nodded with a gleam of excitement in her eyes. Bendy sighed. His day had been going so well. He helped a little around the restaurant, got a tour of the employee-only areas, learned the detail of his job, and went to have a great lunch with his bro. He had just got back after leaving Boris at the little cafe they had picked this time. And what did he get? A drunk deer ranting about him hanging around too much. When he explained that he worked here and what his job was, would be. The nincompoop started braying to Sasha. Bendy pretty much tuned him out. He knew Sasha had this, so he was surprised when a hoof jabbed him in the chest. Hey! Sir, that's enough. Leave, Sasha ordered.
Oh, what? Your little bouncer here gonna kick me out?
The antler-face chuckled. Well, pal, my boss did tell you to scram, Bendy said, still in his relaxed stance.
Oh?
The guy put a hoof hand on top of Bendy's head, pushing his goggles into his skull. Yeah, oh, and one more thing. Bendy's hands wrapped around his wrist, and with a flash of red eyes, the demon flipped the man over his shoulder and toward the front door. The guy bounced on the wooden floor with a thud. He groaned, swirls rolling in his eyes. That got the whole restaurant's attention. Don't call me little. Bendy walked past and grabbed the half-conscious fella by the antler and dragged him out of the restaurant and onto the street. He dropped the guy there and turned back into the dancing lady, dusting off his gloves. A lot of people were staring. Anyone else have a problem? Most turned back to their tables. Sasha was beaming at him. Oh, I like this! This is gonna be great! Boy bands, you sure know how to swing 'em! Bendy chuckled and came up to the lady boss. Of course, that's what you're paying me for after all. Excuse me, Mr. Bendy, a voice asked behind him. He saw fear flash over Sasha's face. Oh boy, what now? Bendy turned around with a raised brow. He was surprised to see the crow policewoman from yesterday. At her curvy side was an equally attractive, if not leaner and shorter, Lady Raccoon. Bendy let his most charming smile loose.
"Why, hello, Miss Featherworth. It's so nice to see you again,"
Bendy said.
"You know them?"
Sasha sounded surprised behind him.
"It's Detective Featherworth and my partner, Detective Ringtail," Featherworth corrected.
"It's a true pleasure." Bendy nodded to Ringtail.
Rachel smirked. It was funny.
"We have some more questions," John said.
"Sure," Bendy shrugged. "I got nothing going out now."
Sasha put a hand on his shoulder. "Bendy, are you sure that's a good idea?" She sounded nervous. Bendy gave her a questioning look, then smiled.
"Yeah, she's been nothing but a sweetheart to me." He winked.
Sasha stared at him for a moment, before nodding and pulling back.
"Can I get you ladies a drink?" Bendy asked.
Ringtail snorted a laugh.
"Sure, hot stuff. I'd love a drink."
She leaned forward at the waist a little to give him a sly smile. John eyeballed her, making her back off, still smiling. The crow's glare demanded professionalism. Bendy, on the other hand, seemed completely stunned that he was being flirted so bluntly by someone other than Sasha. "Some other time," Featherworth said. "We learned that you lost your job as a mechanic recently. Do you mind explaining why?" Featherworth directed the conversation. Bendy seemed to snap out of his daze and focused. Bendy's eyebrows raised in surprise.
"Yeah, Pete, my old boss. He told me I caused a car accident on something I had worked on the other day. Showed me the report and everything. Said cops were looking into it. I didn't get the owner's name, or what exactly failed the car. I know I didn't screw anything up."
Bendy shrugged, putting his hands in his pockets.
"I've tried to find out, but, I got nothing."
He glanced away from them. "Interesting." Featherworth glanced at Ringtail, who looked equally confused.
"Why didn't you simply go to the police?" Ringtail asked.
Bendy's face hardened.
"Those dunderheads won't give me the time of day, let alone information. If I went to them, I'd probably find myself in the slammer. Do you two know anything about it?"
"Nope." Ringtail shrugged and smirked.
"Your friend told us that's pretty weird here."
Bendy nodded. "It is." "There's one other thing I don't understand," Featherworth said. "Why would a mechanic shop have an accident report, unless they had the car too?" Everyone except Ringtail looked at the crow in surprise. Bendy blinked, then his face turned fierce.
"That low cod and lying snake! He pulled a fast one on me!"
He pulled out a hand to smack himself on the forehead.
"I should have noticed. I would have noticed if it wasn't for
Wilson. If he hadn't been shaken up by that guy the night before, he would have known that Pete had no reason to have an accident report."
"Wasn't for?"
Ringtail drew out. "Nothing." Bendy scowled and looked away. "But why trick you?" Featherworth asked.
"If it's him, it's either power or money," Bendy growled. "Or maybe I finally just ticked him off enough. No wonder he seemed so smug."
"What do you—" Ringtail was suddenly cut off by the loud shriek of sirens whizzing by. Everyone glanced at the door.
"Wow, that was loud."
Fear lit Bendy's eyes.
"Was that a cop car?"
"I think it was a firefighting truck," Sasha answered. She noticed his tension. "Bendy, are you okay?"
"Fine,"
he muttered. He had a bad feeling. Bendy from a week ago wouldn't have noticed. He would have carried on like any other day. But now... He seemed pale to the three women.
"Just gotta check."
He went to the doors and stepped out. His eyes went the direction the noise had headed. There was a wisp of smoke trailing up. Bendy stopped a lady carrying a bundle of flowers.
"Excuse me, do you know anything about that?"
He pointed to the wisp of smoke. She glanced at the smoke and shrugged lightly. "Not really. Guess a farmer got carried away. It's on the outskirts of town, I think, so we don't gotta worry," she said.
"The outskirts?"
Bendy's bad feeling solidified into icy dread in his stomach. A thought tickled the back of his mind. He mentally skated away from it. "Want to check it out?" Bendy's head snapped around to see the detectives and Sasha standing behind him. "Featherworth and I are going to head over there in our car. Do you want to come?" Ringtail asked.
"Yeah,"
Bendy said slowly. "Thanks." His eyes went back to the line of smoke. The wind whipped by him as he leaned out the window to see the smoke, his dread slowly turning to horror. Ice entered his veins, his stomach twisted, and his heart sunk somewhere near his feet.
No, no, no. Please, no. Please, please, no. Anything but this. Please, anything but this. Just don't let it be what I think it is.
Bendy mentally begged. When the garage came into view, Bendy could no longer deny it. Flames jumped 10 feet above the roof. The windows were melting and burst from the heat. The roar of destruction overtook the shouting of people and firefighters. Water uselessly dancing into the windows and open garage doors. The sharp smell of burning rubber, oil, and metal filled the area. Panic took Bendy over. He was out of the car window before the vehicle stopped. "Hey, that was dangerous!" The shout followed him into the crowd of onlookers. He shoved his way to the front, ignoring the shouts of protest. It felt like an eternity before he broke through. A line of firefighters and cops were keeping the slowly growing crowd back.
"Has anyone come out?"
Bendy shouted to the nearest firefighter. He shrugged as an answer. Bendy looked beyond him.
"Boris!"
He shouted toward the flames, feeling the heat from where he stood. Bendy spotted a firefighter, escorting Pete away from the building. He was singed, the tip of an ear still flaming like a candle wick.
"How could this have happened? It was so fast. I was almost crisped,"
Pete said.
"And look at my shop."
He waved an arm at the building. It groaned like a dying beast. Bendy slipped past the line and was in front of Pete in an instant. Pete licked his fingers and pinched the small flame out on his ear. Bendy grabbed the larger man by his smoke-stained shirt and yanked him down to look Bendy in the eye.
"Boris! Where's Boris? Did he get out?"
Bendy demanded. His eyes intensely bore into his former boss.
"What? Hey, let go of me!"
Pete tried to push him away.
"Did Boris get out?"
Bendy shook him.
"There was someone else?"
Bendy turned to see another smoke-stained firefighter.
"We didn't see anyone. We can't go back in. It's too hot and the building is going to come down."
Bendy didn't waste words. He dived toward the building. The firefighter must have guessed what his intentions were, because he was suddenly pinned to the dirt by a heavy body. He was scraped up on the rocks, but he didn't feel them.
"Get off me! I have to get him! I can get him!"
Bendy bucked and twisted violently. He shrieked.
"Calm down! All you're going to do is get yourself killed!"
the man said. Bendy's eyes flashed red. Bendy's desperate gaze shot back to the burning, roaring flames.
"Boris!"